Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. So, if you were with us for our last session, you know we left off at a pretty intense crossroads, right? We've been tracking this journey of the student, and we basically completely shattered the whole illusion of motivation. We talked about how, sure, that initial burst of inspiration, it can absolutely kickstart a change, but it almost never sustains it.
Oh, exactly. And honestly, for the student, realizing that motivation was just unreliable was a really tough pill to swallow. I mean, for years, he thought it was the missing piece to his puzzle. But when that belief finally crumbled, it just left this massive vacuum. And stepping right into that vacuum was a much heavier, way more profound question.
Which brings us to a question that honestly seems simple on the surface, but is actually incredibly deep. If motivation isn't the engine that keeps us going over the long haul, then what is? You know, we so often fall into this trap, this totally false belief that transformation begins just by taking action. We think, hey, if we just force ourselves to move, the rest is magically going to follow.
Right, and that brings us face to face with a pretty harsh reality. Now, the student was incredibly observant, and he started noticing this strange, kind of tragic pattern. He watched people performing all the right actions, doing the crazy intense workouts, reading all the self-help books, rigidly following some new morning routine for weeks or even months. Yet somehow, nothing about them essentially changed. The behavior was completely different, but the core person, they remained exactly the same. Oh man, I think we have literally all been here. Let's actually walk through this incredibly frustrating, painfully relatable cycle that the student observed. It always starts with step one, starting a routine. We all know this exact feeling. It's the whole New Year's resolution vibe, or that sudden Sunday night burst of energy where you're like, I'm getting my life together. You buy the fancy planner, you set the early alarm, and you take that initial spark of action.
Exactly. And you know what? For a little while, it actually works. You hit step 2, which is staying consistent. Your discipline genuinely holds up. For a few weeks, your behavior actually shifts. You're doing the thing you promised yourself you'd do, and you start feeling this real sense of pride building up inside.
Oh yeah, that pride is so real. And then comes step 3. You actually see progress. And the beautiful part is, tangible results really do happen. You might lose a few pounds or get through a few chapters of that book or finally get a little more organized. The system seemed to be totally working. But, and here's the kicker, this is exactly what makes the inevitable failure that follows just so utterly confusing.
Because eventually we inevitably hit step 4, which is drifting back. The old patterns just return. And the student realized this wasn't happening because he didn't know what to do or because he lacked the right information. He drifted back because deep down beneath all those shiny new habits, he still viewed himself as the exact same person. It's like a rubber band. If your identity stays the same, your old patterns are always going to find a way to snap you right back to where you started.
Now, what's really interesting here is the uncomfortable shift we have to make. The student realized that behavior alone just isn't the whole story. So he stopped looking at his actions in isolation and started asking a much deeper question. The conversation was no longer about, what am I doing? Because that's just evaluating behavior, right? It shifted to, who am I becoming? And that is evaluating identity. Those are two fundamentally, radically different conversations to be having with yourself.
Totally. I mean, to really grasp the difference, just look at how we normally set our goals. Most of us focus entirely on outcomes. We say lose weight, or get organized, or wake up earlier. You just want to achieve the goal. But identity, it works entirely differently. Identity asks, well, what kind of person would naturally just do these things? It completely shifts your focus. You start asking questions like, what kind of person studies consistently? Or what kind of person actually keeps promises to themselves?
There's this incredible idea that says people rarely believe what they say. They believe what they repeatedly prove. Let's just let that sit for a second. True transformation doesn't begin with setting goals or sitting around waiting for motivation or even downloading the perfect new productivity app. It begins with the gradual, quiet construction of a new identity. And you don't build identity by looking in the mirror and chanting positive affirmations. You build it through undeniable, hard evidence.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this right here is where the real mechanics of change happen. True confidence and discipline, they have to be earned. Every single time you make a decision that actually aligns with the person you want to become, it acts as a literal vote for your new identity. It happens one tiny decision at a time. One small promise kept. You repeat an action long enough, and suddenly it stops being this massive struggle and just starts feeling completely normal.
But here is the massive challenge. And honestly, it requires a lot of empathy for ourselves. Identity changes incredibly slowly, way slower than any of us expect or wanted to. There is no cinematic switch that suddenly flips. There's no dramatic overnight transformation montage with cool music. Most of the time, the work you're doing to change who you are feels entirely invisible. The student wanted to become disciplined, sure, but he had to first become the type of person who naturally does disciplined things. I completely agree. And because that change is so invisible, we run headfirst into this trap. It's what we call the gap. This is exactly where most of us just throw our hands up and quit. We look at the overwhelming, terrifying distance between our current self and our ideal self, and we judge our entire worth based on where we are today. Instead of paying attention to the tiny, incremental shifts in who we are slowly becoming, we just stare into the gap. And man, the gap just feels paralyzing. Exactly. So the crucial point is this. Identity isn't built by taking some massive, heroic leap across that gap. It's built by reducing it, literally millimeter by millimeter. The student realized he didn't need a total, overnight overhaul of his entire life. He simply needed enough daily evidence to support a brand new story in his head, a new belief about himself. And this brilliantly illustrates how we've completely misunderstood systems. It totally reframed how the student viewed his routines. Let's map out this causal chain here. Because systems aren't actually about being perfectly productive or hyper-efficient. Systems matter because they create repetition. Repetition creates evidence. That evidence slowly builds your new identity. And once your identity shifts, the behavior, it just naturally follows. You know, there is a profound sense of freedom in that realization. For the student, it meant the actual goal was never to build the world's most flawless, unbreakable routine. The true goal was simply to become the type of person who no longer needs constant motivation to get things done. Think about that. When the action just becomes who you are, you stop agonizing over how you feel about doing it. It's incredible. This completely changed the game for him. All those old anxious questions like, how do I stay motivated? Or how do I become way more productive? They just vanished. Poof, gone. They were replaced by one single guiding question. What evidence am I collecting about who I am becoming? Every small action, every choice, just became a piece of data. It really is a beautifully philosophical way to look at our lives. Because let's face it, external factors are always going to fluctuate. That's just life. You will hit your goals and immediately need new ones. Your motivation is going to fade the absolute second you get tired or stressed out. Even the absolute best systems will occasionally fail you. But the person you forge in the process, that identity you build through all that collected evidence, that remains permanently yours. And for the student, that internal shift was absolutely everything. Not because his external life suddenly looked drastically different, but because the architect building that life was different. Which leaves us staring at a fascinating new horizon. Once you stop fighting for motivation and you start quietly stacking up evidence for your new identity, what happens when all those tiny daily actions finally start to add up? What actually happens when progress finally begins to compound? Well, that is exactly what we'll explore in the next chapter of this journey.